Welcome back to the 14th Jaipur Literature Festival. We are here for Diggy Palace. The front lawn, of course, is protected by Dettol. Of gifted voices, the life and art of M.S. Subbulakshmi, Keshav Desiraju with Mrinal Pande and Samant Subramaniam. Keshav Desiraju's book of gifted voice, The Life and Art of M.S. Subbulakshmi, brings a new perspective to one of the most famous vocalists of the Carnatic music, with access to less known information about her personal life and seeing this in conjunction with the finesse of her performances. The author hopes to correct some assumptions about MS, the person, and her command over a vast repertoire of composition. Known to be a philanthropist and a woman of exquisite style, MS's devotional music has enthralled generations of listeners. Jawaharlal Nehru, our first Prime Minister, called her the Queen of Music, and adoring audiences thronged to her concerts. In conversations with Mrinal Pande and Samant Subramaniam, Desiraju places M.S. Subbulakshmi's achievements in the larger context of the advent of film, radio, and gramophone, which dramatically altered the music industry. The book is being launched here at the Jaipur Literature Festival 2021. Keshav Desiraju has retired from government service but remains engaged with issues in public health and serves on the board of several non-profit organizations in the sector. He is a co-editor of Healers or Predators, Healthcare Corruption in India, and the author of Gifted Voice, The Life and Art of M.S. Subbulakshmi. Mrinal Pande has edited well-known Hindi periodicals Vama and Saptahik Hindustan for the Times of India and the Hindustan Times Group, respectively. She has worked in the visual media as editor-anchor for Hindi news at NDTV and India's public broadcaster, Doordarshan. In 2000, she became India's first woman chief editor of a multi-edition Hindi daily, Hindustan. She was also the first woman to be Secretary General of the Editors Guild of India. She is the founder-president of the Indian Women's Press Corps, a national body of Indian women's journalists. Samant Subramaniam is an award-winning journalist. His most recent book, A Dominant Character, is a biography of the scientist and communist J.B.S. Haldane. His first book, Following Fish, travels around the Indian coast, won the Shakti Bhat First Book Prize. His second book, This Divided Island, Stories from the Sri Lankan War, won the 2015 Crossword Prize for Non-Fiction. Do remember to comment by typing it into the comment section below. Ladies and gentlemen of gifted voice, the life and art of M.S. Subbulakshmi, Keshav Desiraju with Mrinal Pande and Samant Subramanian.
Thank you so much, Sanjoy. It's such a pleasure for me to be here, in particular to talk to Mrinal, who I've admired for so long and know reasonably well, but also to introduce and talk about the book of one of my dearest friends, Keshav Desiraju. I've known about this book and been excited about this book for at least 3 years now, and it's so rewarding to see it come to fruition and to such a great fruition. Keshav, I enjoyed your book thoroughly. Thank you for writing it. And I'm going to start by asking you, people are inevitably going to ask you, I think, the first question of why you chose to write about MS. But I'm going to subvert that a little bit by asking you to recall for us the first time you attended a concert by MS. Do you remember where it was, which year it was? You must have been a strapping young lad in your early 20s or late teens. What did she sing? Tell us all about that.
Well, thank you, Samant. Thank you, Sanjoy. Thank you, Mrinal. It's lovely to be here. And it's really lovely that the book is being discussed. The first time, look, I have a childhood memory of attending a wedding concert in 1960 or thereabouts, but that doesn't count. The first concert I attended was September 1967, where I know she began with Harinarayana and Kedaram, she sang Rama Rama Gunasima and Simendra Madhyama. My memory, I have it down somewhere, but these are the two I can remember instantly. But I remember sitting in the first balcony of the Shramshakti Hall in Bombay. In those days, the massive 3,000 seater. And those were wonderful Sabha kacheris. Artists from Madras would come and sing on both the Saturday and the Sunday. So that all members had access to the best music. So that was my first concert, yes.
And was it the kind of experience that immediately entranced you, or did you sort of grow into becoming a Rasika of MS?
People my age who began listening to Carnatic music in the 60s, MS was just the dominant presence. There were great singers. In the early 60s, Ayakudi, G.N.B., Madurai Mani were all still performing. There were many, many great singers, but MS was a presence that you simply could not miss. And I think she was captivating. There was no other way from it. And as I say in my book, her career went through many, many phases. In my mind, the 60s were the greatest years, when there was a mellowness and repose that came into her presentational style. And I was fortunate to begin listening to MS at that stage.
And so, of course, you've had close on half a century of listening to MS. But obviously, to write a book about her also signifies that you have identified some kind of gap in the public knowledge of MS, whether it is in the literature that surrounds her, or in just what people think of her and how people think of her. What was that sort of gap that you thought you could bring this book into?
It's very interesting that you use the word gap. I was reading something very recently by the great novelist Hilary Mantel, and this is a review that Mantel writes of a biography of a minor Tudor character. And then Mantel asks in this review, well, why has this biography been written? And then she has this wonderful sentence, we know more about what she wore than what she thought. And in many ways, you can say that about MS. We know about MS Blue, we know about the way she wore her 6-yard sarees, we know about the diamonds, the flowers, the glamour, just the overwhelming presence. But did she really think it was important to learn Varnams? I don't have an answer to that question. Did she draw on what she learned from her Varnams when she sang her Alapanas? I don't know. And you see, this is what, in some ways, I think I tried to answer this question. It's not for me to say with what degree of success, because there's obviously still a great deal about MS that we don't know. But I really wanted to write about MS as a musician. And as I've said before in the book also, she was portrayed as many things, many things. And she was many people in her own life. But she was first and foremost the classical musician of the first rank. And that is the image I wanted to capture.
Does it, and I'm going to get one more question into Keshav, because I have another follow-up to this from Mrinal, but does it surprise you, Keshav, that given how ubiquitous classical music was to some extent and continues to be in India, that musicians don't talk that much about their music, that MS never talked in her time about whether she drew on her Varnam knowledge when she sang an Alapana, and that people never asked her these questions?
Second question first. People never asked her these questions because she was not really exposed to questioners in that sense. But it's not many performing artists today speak quite a lot. Dancers, musicians are giving interviews, talking about their stuff. If you look at lives that have been written, there is some amount of people do talk about it. She was, I think, unusual in that she was naturally timid, I believe, and she was also not really allowed to meet people and talk to people. So we have to just draw on straws wherever we find them.
Right. Mrinal, I wanted to ask you, we had discussed earlier when the three of us were speaking, exactly this question, which is how little information there seems to be about women musicians, classical musicians in general, beyond just the extreme superficiality of how they looked, or sort of who they were with, their relationships they were in, the patrons. There's no sort of knowledge of their interiorities, as it were. And I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit from your own experience and knowledge of North Indian classical singers, particularly in the early to mid 20th century, women who were performing but were merely seen sort of as tokens rather than as real people.
Right. I think there is a certain amount of self-effacement by women who came from professional singers and dancers families. These were matriarchal families, and they somehow catered to a society which was not very keen to listen to their side of the story, because somewhere or the other they were exploited in various ways. Uh, and one unspoken truth that came out in my interaction with various senior singers was how they are not just singers, also actors and women in the dancing community. Uh, Financially, they were the first breed of women in India to be self-sufficient, and not only self-sufficient, also have whole families depending on their earnings. But at the same time, their agency to negotiate their earnings, to invest them wisely, was very limited. Take, for example, Gohar Jan of Kolkata. She was one of the richest women in Kolkata at one time, also in Banaras. She told the viceroy, my one mujra gets me more than what you earn in a month as your salary. So, but she died indigent. But had it not been for the large heartedness of the Mysore Maharaja, who offered to have her come and live in the palace in her last days, she would have been out in the streets. She got bogged down with various kinds of litigations. Her property was lost, her money was lost. And so these are women who devoted the entire life to their art and their craft, and they worshipped it like a god. And that obviously leaves them very little time to really negotiate the finances. Usually, in case of male singers or male dancers, the family comes to the rescue, especially the wife, and they keep tabs on everything. And then the male community also makes it easier for them, what we call in Sanskrit sancharan, interaction between various kinds of groups of male, both in the financial world, in the performing world, and so on. So it's not surprising, but it is indeed sad. I had an interesting experience with Kishori Amonkar once. I was sitting with her in the green room in New Delhi. No, not in New Delhi, it was in Bhopal. And we were talking generally about Riyaz and the certain notes and that she was explaining to me about Madhyama, and she was extremely knowledgeable. And then suddenly a very young girl came with a red rose, very sweet little girl. She couldn't be more than 14 or 15, and gave it to Kishori ji, touched her feet and said, Ki, you should wear it in your hair. And Kishori Amonkar suddenly turned red. She threw the flower away. She said, I'm not the flower wearing kind. So we sort of froze. Anyway, later on, I asked my guru, who also came from Maharashtra, why she reacted like that. I said, I think women wear flowers in their hair all the time. She said, up north, you associate this kind of shringar with women who sing for a profession, and it's looked down upon. She has traversed a long path to destigmatize herself. So, it creates a kind of wrinkle in the minds of the woman, and she's very hesitant to talk about her experiences, her early experiences. Take Roshanara Begum, for example, brilliant daughter of Kirana Gharana's Ustad, and Ustad Karim Khan. And she migrated to Pakistan. And once she visited India the last time before her death, she told the audiences, she said, Gana tu mera yahan chhoot gaya. My songs have been left behind. There are only army generals there, and they only want to listen to Heer Raja. So that was a little bit of misgiving. But then she said, of course, it's a nice country and so on. So you find women who are professionally so brilliant, unchallenged, and who are also financially extremely well off, being diffident right to the end, and towards the end also turning towards religion in a very big way. Shobha Gurtu is another example. She was a brilliant singer of Upshastri, what we call Upshastri Sangeet, Thumri, Chaiti, Dadra, what have you. But she also began singing only bhajans towards the end. I often wondered if it is to get a better pat on the back from the society, which allows religious singing for women. And this is
Right.
a fact that has been corroborated by Vishnu Digambar Paluskar, who wrote out a booklet for women of religious songs. He said this is the only way music can enter the lives of married women in India. So, yes, there are lots of untold stories there waiting to be explored.
And that reminds us also of at least one of the popular images of MS Keshav, that she was a bhakti singer primarily. It is obviously not, it is extremely, an extremely limited description of her music, but it is definitely one that people do apply. And the other thing that Pranal said also, which is that these women travel a great distance, both geographically and psychically, to sort of remove themselves from an earlier background that might be considered stigmatized. That also applies to MS. And I was wondering, Keshav, I mean, one of the journeys she made was from Madurai to Madras, of course. One of the other things she did, which is not common definitely in this day and age, is that she, at least in the early part of her career, traversed the worlds of classical music and the worlds of film quite effortlessly and seamlessly. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that part of her career and maybe follow that up with a reading that we had discussed about Meera, her most well-known film.
Thank you, Saman. I think what is important, both about what you said, the journey from Madurai to Madras and the entry into films, 1936 is when shooting for Seva Sadanam began, is that there was clearly some ambition here. There was clearly she wanted to get on. She and her mother, they left Madurai in 1932 when she was 16. And they came out in those days, it must have been a big journey. And then the willingness to join film, which shows a certain adventurousness that we do not associate with the MS that the world group came to know later on. And about the films, I think the only thing one must say is, I don't think she was a particularly brilliant actor. But then the acting was not the point.
Right.
She was quite enchanting on screen. And I'd just like to read just a little bit from the book, from the chapter called Meera. And if any of you who are listening have the book open before you, this is at page 122. I will edit a bit as I read because we don't have too much time, but maybe you'll enjoy listening to this. The story of Meera is rich with love and longing, with poetry and song, and it is a story which is known throughout India, and not just in her native desert lands in the northwest of modern India. She was probably born in 1498 in the Rajput clan called Rathod, and married in 1516 into the Sisodia clan. Rajput women were bound by ancient codes of chastity and obedience, and Meera conformed to these, but she was, in her mind, bound to none other than Krishna, and found her companions not in the palace, but in spaces where worship took place and where devotees of all castes mingled. Widowhood, banishment, and pilgrimage became her lot, and around 1546, if legend is to be believed, she became one with the idol at Dwarka. Meera's poems are songs of longing, but they are not songs of desire, as are, for instance, the Padams of Kshetragya, which Subbulakshmi was also to sing. The decision to cast Subbulakshmi in a film on Meera was taken as early as October 1943. Kalki Krishnamurthy wrote the dialogue, S.P. Venkataraman composed the music, Ellis Dungan, the director of Savitri and Shakuntala, was recalled, still a successful director of many Tamil films without knowing a word of the language. The songs are still familiar and include the immortal Kachile Varangeetam in the raga Ratipati Priya, a tune borrowed from Sheila Sarkar's Toot Gayi Manvina. There were other very popular songs as well. The decision to remake the film in Hindi was Sadasivam's, who, through this one move, wittingly gave Subbulakshmi the superb opportunity not just to play the role of a singer and poet who was also a saint, but to display this to all of India. He may have even sensed that Meera would be a money spinner. This early identification with the Bhakti tradition shaped Subbulakshmi's later career as a performing artist. She was never anymore to be just a singing star with an appealing screen presence. The students of Bhakti has observed as the film became famous and Subbulakshmi's own reputation as a Bhakta began to grow, this Tamil version of Mirabai was transposed back into Hindi. Meera in both versions, Tamil and Hindi, for all its lack of sophistication, is compellingly watchable. Subbulakshmi's entrance on screen in both the Tamil and Hindi versions is in a sequence where the child Meera, played by Sadasivam's elder daughter Radha, singing Nandabala, becomes, to the frenzied breakdown of bells and cymbals and a full-blown orchestra, the adult Meera singing Murali Mohana. For all its theatrics, it is unforgettable.
Thank you. That was so lovely, Keshav. In fact, I think what we should do is follow this up with a brief clip from Kaatrile Varumgeetham. The song's title translates literally into the song arrives on the air, or song arrives in the air, which is something that which is something that I identify with quite literally. The first time I ever went to Banaras, I remember waking up early in the morning and stepping out for a cup of tea. And the first thing I hear is MS Suprabhatam on the air somewhere from some loudspeaker. And it was the most touching moment. It was a cold winter morning. It was just perfect. So I'm going to play a little bit of that. And I want to also talk about MS's presence up north, in her sort of what kind of psychic and public role she occupied in North India. So here's the song, a short snatch of it for people who are interested in listening.
Thank you. That was lovely.
It was beautiful. I mean, the essential sweetness of her voice, which is a cliche when it comes to MS, but is unfortunately true, is just preserved right up until I think the 80s and the 90s. There's something at the core of that that just never changes. It's stunning. Mrinal, Meera was, of course, as Keshav just said, remade in Hindi. And I just talked a little bit about how she was, she continues to be a significant auditory presence in Banaras and other towns in India, in North India. I was wondering back then, just before and after India became independent, what was the kind of image that MS occupied that might have been quite distinct from the image that she occupied in South India?
Well, she came at a time when our society was just about beginning to accept professional singing women. And here was a very graceful presence from the south of India, wearing very traditional clothes with almost unmatchable voice and such a repertoire of music. So she was, I think, welcomed with open arms. But I wanted to go back a little to the Meera thing and what she sang just now. If you see the photograph on the cover of the book, there is a slight impishness in her glance. She's looking sideways. It's the impishness of a playful artist who will, weave little asides to her sakhis, as it were. So even in Meera, she was able to, imbibe Meera, because Meera does the same thing. She's singing for the saints, but she's also weaving little messages when she's calling out to Krishna. She is, "Main Hari Charanan ki dasi," I am a dasi to the lotus feet of Hari, is innocuous and, very bland. But behind that, she weaves Savariya, Mohaniya, Nagariya Meropiya. The dark one, the attractive one, and the urbane lover is actually my lover. So, and then she goes back to Malina Vishaya Rastyagi Jagike Ramanama. So I, listening to her as a woman at this age, I find that like all great female artists, she's weaving little messages and leaving us little cursors all through her repertoire, which glows when you really listen to her. When all your own Malinta is also at a low ebb, then you listen to her as a brilliant voice. I mean, I just could not help nodding my head when she was singing, even in that little clip. But in the North, we've also had the same tradition of, but in the North, I think the Ganika, as they called it, tradition stayed longer, and it did not get intermarried or re-invited into temples. The males sang in the temples. We have Ustad Abdul Karim Khan singing in the temple and, singing songs of devotion. We have many Ustads singing. We have Bismillah Khan playing his Shehnai. We have Ustad Alauddin Khan playing his Sarod to Maihar Saraswati Devi. But think of a professional singing woman going and entering a temple precinct in the North. It's almost, surreal. And even if they go sometimes, it's not quite the same thing, the kind of welcome that a male singer receives. And then the stories that they generate, like for example, Shobha Guttu once sang brilliantly. She was also a Krishna devotee in the Banke Bihari temple. Mharo Pranam Banke Bihari ji is one of her famous bhajans. And I asked somebody, how did she sing? She said, oh, it was so divine that a dove came and settled on the idol of Krishna while she was singing. Now, that's all very beautiful and poetic and very touching and so on. But I want to know exactly how she interpreted it. So there are a lot of differences in the way people listened up north also. But in case of MS, she was introduced as a Brahmanical, very pious, very noble lady, and made her big appearance through Meera. And then, of course, there was that divine voice. So it made it easier for people to warm up to her than to say Roshanara Begum, who was also brilliant, but, she was not so good looking and also didn't sing so much for films. Or other people like, say, Malka Pukhraj, for example, they'll talk very differently about Malka Pukhraj, and they'll talk very differently about, it's the same Brahmanical syndrome that a woman who has accepted the limitations of a certain varnashram delineated role for a woman, for a female artist. And these were women like Saraswati, for example, who broke through the mold and said, what the hell, I will talk about myself as a, Devdasi. And people accepted her because they were, I think, MS probably for her own reasons chose to be what she was, and which was considerable. But one would have loved to have had some pieces of her writing. I understand from the book that several things that she left behind were burnt, or maybe she burnt them before she went. But that's a pity. That's a great loss to all of us.
Right. I mean, this question is very interesting, Mrinal, that you raised, because you say that the image in the North was of MS as a Brahminical woman, whereas, of course, as we know, her mother was not a Brahmin. She came from the Devdasi community. And Keshav, I wanted to ask you a little bit about this word that I know you love a lot, agency. I know you adore that word, Keshav. And so I want to ask you a little bit about MS's agency in choosing the kind of image that she lived into, choosing the way in which, for example, she forged her relationship with Sadasivam, who was her husband, but also in all senses, her manager. A lot of people think or assume that she was quite put upon, that he controlled her to the minutest level, and she had no choice or say in anything. But I think your argument is that she had a certain degree of agency, and she made some of these choices with a certain aim in mind. And I want you to talk us through some of this agency of MS.
Well, very quickly, Samant, it's not only Devadasi women who are born with agency. Every single one of us is born with some degree of agency, depending entirely on the circumstances of one's birth. And what we make of our agency depends on us. And yes, it's a very fair argument to say that Devadasi women were born with the agency to perform, as Mrinal said earlier in the conversation. They were born with the agency to live lives somewhat independently. I think the crucial question is whether they had the option to exercise or not exercise their agency. Nobody has any problem with anyone's decision if it is a decision made in free will. And I suspect that a very large number of Devadasi women were not really allowed to express free will in the matter of their profession. Now, it's fairly obvious to me at this point of time that Subbulakshmi made a very clear decision. She ran away from home. After Seva Sadanam, her mother took her back to Madurai. She ran away back to Madras to the protection of a married man, but the only man whom she presumably thought would look out for her. She exercised a choice. Radha Vishwanathan, her husband's elder daughter, has written somewhere that at that point of time, soon after she married, the only thing MS wanted was to be a wife and mother. She had no interest in singing. I mean, left to herself, she wanted the protection and security. These were definite choices exercised by her. She was not going to be driven by the argument that you are born to a great heritage. You have a fantastic voice. There's so much. I don't believe that she became what she became, and we know about this was the direction in which her husband propelled. But we must respect the fact that she lived the life that she chose. You may not agree, I may not agree that this was it was her choice. If it was her choice and it suited her, as I've said, when I've talked about R.K. Narayan's story, Selvi, which is very loosely patterned on Subbulakshmi's life, I don't think MS in real life would have opted for the solution that Selvi chose in the short story. It was not the choice she made. Many of us make choices that we regret. So that may well be true. But it is still our choice. It is still our choice. And I think that must be respected.
Right. I wanted to ask you a little bit about, I had one question about her music that I've borrowed shamelessly from your earlier talk with Vishnu Vasudev, because I think he made a very good point and you addressed it very well. And I think our audience also deserves to know your insight into this, which is that for people who have followed MS extensively, like you, for a long time, it is impossible to escape the fact that perhaps thanks to Sadasevam or perhaps thanks to her own agency, many of her concerts acquired a certain, a sameness is a kind way of putting it, which is it would be very similar songs, very similar ragams that were repeated, quite often. You could present a classic MS song list, and I think you would find it occurring across multiple concerts. And even the alapanas, that's the parts of the concerts that are supposed to be interpretive and improvisatory. I think even there you could tell that she would do certain things at certain times. And I was wondering how this squares with our idea of a musician, and a Carnatic musician in particular, as being a fount of creativity and innovation while on the stage. The fact that the music moves you, you are supposed to move along with the music and to go wherever it takes you. This contradicts a little bit the image of the Carnatic musician. So I was wondering how you square these two things and why she did what she did.
Everything you say is correct. But I think the trick in how she, if I may say so, got away with it is because every one of those items in themselves were perfect. If you just listen to, any of the songs she sang ad nauseum, Varanarada, Narada Muni, Takarani, everybody, you just listen to it, it is perfectly rendered. Any of those alapanas, if you listen to it, it is just, she knows exactly the right length in which to describe the entire raga. Now you could ask the question, if it worked for her, why does it not work for other musicians? I think the answer to that is, I think that is just the fantastic voice and the ability to communicate so richly. She had a very, very unusual gift in that, and that she was able to, and if you saw her on stage, she didn't look like somebody who was doing something for the 100th time. There was complete involvement. She was laughing to herself. She was appreciating her own singing. She would sometimes, she finished an alapna and she would smile at the violinist. I mean, it was heartbreaking even. She was just happy because she knew she had just pulled off a brilliant 2-minute alapna. So I think that was it. It was like what she was doing very often, but she was doing it brilliantly every time she did it.
Right.
What saddens me though is occasionally when you heard her do something out of the ordinary, then you suddenly realize, what this artist is capable of doing. A song that you've never heard before, you've never heard her sing it before. For instance, the Muthuswami Dikshit's bicentenary concert in 1975 December, she sings Sri Mooladhara Chakra Vinayakam. Beautiful, beautiful song. Veena Pustra Dharini, the Daru in Sri Ranjini, Sati Devamu. Wonderful, wonderful song, which just would not feature in her regular concert. But she was capable of it, and that's what makes me sad.
That's true. I'm lucky enough to sometimes be the recipient of one of your emails saying, I have found this MS song. I have never heard her sing this before. And you exhibit the glee of somebody who's found a lost Picasso. So I think that is very much the feeling that one gets when one finds something like this. We don't have any questions from the audience yet on MS in particular. So I'm going to continue with my line of questioning selfishly and ask you one more question, to both of you actually, Keshav and Mrinal, which is that MS was in two senses a political figure as well. Broadly, in a pan-Indian way, she was of course extremely involved in the independence movement and was closely allied to Gandhi's Satyagraha, to Gandhi's ideals, singing the songs that he loved quite often. And then Keshav, of course, in the South, she was involved much later in the Tamil Isai movement, which was a response to the imposition of Hindi by the central government. And so I was wondering, since we only have 7 minutes or so left, if Mrinal, you could talk very quickly first about her association with Gandhi in the public mind in the North. And then Keshav, if we have time, I'd love to get a sense of her involvement with Tamil Isai as well.
I think it was early around 1940 or sometime when she sang Shankara Bharanam for Gandhiji at Sevagram, was it? So I think her association with Gandhi was multifaceted. In Gandhi, she found a pure, very noble soul. She also found somebody who was deeply appreciative of the spiritual side of her singing, not just attracted by her good looks. Good looking and gifted women sometimes crave to be ugly so that people would pay more attention to their thoughts than to their looks. And I think in Gandhi, she found such a noble balance. And Gandhiji also realized in her that here was a mind and a talent which went beyond gender. And I think that was a period when a lot of social ideas were changing. Gandhiji was putting women out in the front line for the independence movement. He had realized how women were able to swing people away from violence. And in Subbulakshmi, he found somebody who could swing music away from the cheapness it had degenerated into, back again to its pristine wholesomeness. And in fact, he asked her to sing Hari Tum Haro Janaki Peer. She didn't know the notes, and overnight it was set to music by Dilip Ray, who was then in Pondicherry. And then she sang it, and nobody who has heard it can ever forget the pukar, as we say in North, the echo and the longing in her voice. So I think Gandhiji probably is underappreciated as an arts person. He was very matter of fact, but he did have an appreciation for the real thing, which a lot of so-called rasikas miss out on. And I think MSA's politicization, I don't know her as well as either of you, but I think her politicization had something to do with a certain trust that she developed with a Gandhi-like figure, that he was paying her attention for her art and for the depth of her feelings. And that for her was enough, to sing whatever Gandhi commanded. And that is an artist's response, not a woman's response. It is an artist's response. You find a true Rasika who appreciates you for the right things. And then, so I personally feel that was her politicization. And that is the politicization of a lot of women artists who are really good artists, not the mediocre or the ones who ride the political pony, but genuine women artists do politicize things by their activism.
Right. And I think, of course, it was a sign of the times that while it was inevitable that Gandhi would be able to quite cleverly, I think, position MS at the forefront of his other movements. In Tamil Isai Keshav, there was also another man or a couple of men, Sadasivam and Kalki Krishnamurti, who were also positioning MS for their own sort of political agenda. So if you would be able to talk us through that, that might be a good note to end on, just sort of the fact that she could never escape.
No, very quickly. The very interesting thing about Tamil Isai is both how the movement grew and how it disappeared. But it grew, there was the political background to it. There was the Dravidian movement, the E.V. Ramaswamy Nayakar, the Dravid Kazhagam, the Justice Party. It was a kind of ranking of forces. On one side were upper caste, Tamil-speaking, possibly nationalist-minded Congress types. The other side were also Tamil-speaking, but not necessarily upper caste, who somehow resented what may have been seen as the imposition of some kind of all-national image on them. The whole movement began with that we must respect and restore to its place of honor the Tamil language. And music they suddenly found that the practitioners of a musical form living in Tamil Nadu in a Tamil-speaking area, getting popularity, fame, earning money through the sabhas and everything else, singing mainly Telugu and Sanskrit songs. This was just insupportable. And this could not be tolerated. Now the establishment, the people who are Tamil people, great scholars of Tamil, who just sort of took the very lofty view that, well, okay, you want to sing in Tamil, but what exactly are you going to sing? There is nothing by way of a repertory of Tamil songs for you to sing. Now, Subbulakshmi, entirely at the bidding of her husband and Kalki Krishnamurti, cast her lot, but not Rajaji at that stage, cast her lot with Tamil Isai. She toured Tamil Nadu and Ceylon, raising funds. But by the time the Tamil Isai Sangam was set up, she boycotted the Music Academy, sang only at Sangam. Once the Tamil Isai Sangam had been set up, the movement petered out.
Right.
And we forgot about Tamil Isai. Tamil songs have begun to come in. Now, musicians these days sing, plentifully of Tamil songs, which is, and the issue in some manner has resolved itself. Right. But it was very interesting at the time it happened.
Right.
And
Excellent. I think, yes. On that note, I think we've just run out of time. We're exactly 45 minutes in. Thank you so much, Keshav and Mrinal, for such a nice conversation. Everybody who's watching, please buy the book. It's an excellent book. I cannot recommend it enough. You don't need to know Carnatic music to read it. There's so much about her life and the life of an artist in that era, and a woman artist in particular. Thank you once again, Keshav.
Thank you, Saman. Thank you, Mrinal. It was lovely being with both of you. Lovely conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. I enjoyed it too. Thank you. And thank you, the Jaipur Festival people.
Thank you, for giving us all this chance. Thank you.
Thank you, Keshav. Thank you, Mrinal. Thank you, Saman Subramaniam, for this absolutely brilliant session and really giving us an insight into the world, the life and times of that celebrated MS Subbulakshmi. Thank you all to our wonderful celebration partners, Diageo, Thank you all for watching and being such a great audience. Do remember to stay logged on and go from session to session, front lawn to Darbar Hall and back, catching all our wonderful speakers. Don't forget to check out the Amazon bookstore online, and of course, buy something to support the arts and artisans from Earth Fables, our craft store. Any contribution from you will really support us at Teamwork Arts, even as we continue to bring you free of cost all of this knowledge and ideas from across the world. Please remember to tweet using the hashtag Jaipur Literature Festival 2021, and our handles are at Jaipur Litfest. The festival is protected by Dettol. Stay masked, stay safe.